It's hard to bring justice to an injustice world. You should look at McFarlane Toys, Page Puncher's Injustice 2 Batman. Even after he's been exposed to the world as Batman, Bruce Wayne keeps his vow to avenge his parents' death by fighting for justice. He refuses to execute his enemies, believing that once he crosses that line, he's no better than the cowards he battles. Now then, before we get a closer look at Wayne from a not-so-perfect world, let's grab the tape measure and measure off how tall the figure stands. While I'm doing this as well, I'd like to thank the folks over at McFarlane Toys that did provide this sample of the brand new Page Puncher's Injustice 2 comic Batman. We can have a look at this review. I'm going to also bring in a figure for comparisons in a second. I'll also show you guys all the things that come included with this Batman. But in the meantime, though, Batman taking it to right the very top of his head, or I guess more so the point of his cowl, Batman stands 7 inches in height. Or the figure is going to be 17.5 centimeters tall. Sticking with the Batman, but not necessarily from this world, I'm going to slide over the one from Injustice 2, and I'm going to bring in the Batman from DC Rebirth. I wanted to bring him in, not only just because he's a comic Batman that most of you probably already have in your collection, but he's also of the same height. He's not as big necessarily, not as armored up as the one we get from Injustice 2, but when you look at the figures side to side like this, you can see that they're about the same size to one another. One thing I do like about the Page Punchers line is that you do get yourself an included comic. In this case, the comic included is Injustice. Not necessarily Injustice 2, but just Injustice. Love the artwork here on the front. This artwork also happens to be featuring all the characters that are of this wave. So we're going to be looking at the rest of these figures in upcoming videos. Stay tuned for that. But the artwork is pretty good, though, on the front. If I flip, though, through the pages, you can see sort of the different costumes that these characters are now carrying or wearing in the comics. Specifically Batman, and you can see Superman as well has a slightly more armored up look. One armor I really would like to see for a future figure release is this version of Superman right here where he's hooked up. I love the look of this, and I think that would really translate well to an action figure if McFarlane Toys is ever considering to do any more of these. And just again, quickly flip through these so you guys can kind of quickly see what's going on here. Really nice looking artwork. There's Oliver Queen. And again, some really nice, yeah, we're going to be looking at the rest of these figures in upcoming videos, so certainly do stay tuned for that. On the back, there's also an advertisement for Black Adam, and then on the back, you got the DC logo. I'm going to put that to the side. Figure also comes included with a trading card. And if it looks familiar to you, it happens to be the same image that we got on the front cover, at least of the comic. So we flip that around to the back, same image of Batman. We've got Batman here, real name Bruce Wayne, as if he didn't already know. And then 2 paragraph reads. You can read for yourself if you so wish. Happens to also be the same thing. I know. I always say this. It's the same thing I read at the beginning of the video as well. So going to move that to the side. Figure also, again, even though he is part of the Page Punchers line, still managed to pull off getting a display stand. Still manages to pull off also a DC logo down below, and still manages to pull off a peg that's off to the far corner there. They can attach to the underside of Batman's feet. Always best advised, especially if you're going to look to display these figures, that stands do certainly come in handy, especially if you're one that likes to put them in creative looking poses. And move that also to the side. The figure also comes with what I could best describe as probably the smallest batarangs we've ever gotten with a Batman figure. Not only for the sizing of them, but also for how thick they are. Generally, batarangs or any of the accessories we usually get for DC Multiverse figures tend to be thick. This one's actually not as thick as I would expect it to be. It's got some decent detailing, although molded here in dark gray. Weird thing about it, though, is you do get 2 of these, and yet with Batman's hands, while you would think normally he'd have 2 gripping hands, he has one hand specifically for punching people. The other hand, though, is actually ideal for holding the batarang, but again, he only has one hand to do it. I guess they did give you technically a secondary batarang in case you happen to lose both, or you lose one, you have the second one. Or I guess if you wanted to, you could try to fit both into his hands. You can very difficultly fit them into his hand. I would probably maybe heat the hand in hot water, I think, just a little bit more to hold it hold the batarang just a little bit more. If you have it, if you want to have it just, I'm trying to do this right here. If you want to have it in between like the thumb and his finger, like sort of like he's holding it like a playing card, that's the harder of the 2. If you sort of just want to phone it in, it's so easy just to kind of slide it into his gripping hand, and that's more than enough. And maybe we'll just twist it this way. Yeah, that does look good. I don't know why we necessarily got a second batarang, but I mean, usually with me, Murphy's Law, if I'm going to be losing an accessory, I'd like to at least think I'm going to have an extra one. So that's not a bad thing. I'm going to put that to the side, getting a closer look at Batman. I'll tell you right off the bat, I am not one for liking the designs of Injustice 2 either, even in the video games or either any of the figures we've ever gotten in the past, the Flash being the worst of the bunch. And yet, you know, I got to say, I like the look of Batman here. Maybe because it does bear a little bit of a resemblance also to the Val Kilmer suit that he wears in Batman Forever. I see a little bit of that. You may not see a little bit of that. But the attention of detail is actually quite good on this character. If you don't mind an all-gray suit like this, there really isn't a lot of color happening here for Batman, but at least the color that's there, it's handled well. Head sculpt-wise, again, is really good on this one, down to the details of actually having the nostrils being visible underneath the cowl. The skin tone is a little on the paler side, but it's more than enough. I'm happy enough with it. One thing I really like about the head sculpt, I don't know if you guys can actually see it, I just assumed, here's the assumption that I made, getting this figure, I just thought that they probably would have just painted the eyes white. Au contraire, mon frere, if you actually look at the eyes really, really close, hopefully I can get the camera to focus in on that, you can actually see that they painted the pupils. They painted the pupils with what I could best describe as like the smallest eyes we've ever gotten a Batman figure. Managed to do that. I'm really impressed. Well done. Well done. The sculpting of the head is actually quite good. I kind of like the way that the points of the cowl actually kind of be a continuation for the section just below his eye. It really does give him a really interesting looking design cowl. Again, this is from somebody that does not like the Injustice 2 designs at all. The cape is also something that's really rather interesting, the way they've actually attached it to the side of his body. He has a little bit of black here. He's got more black down below here, but it's not nearly as black as what we actually get for the cape. The cape seems more shinier of a black finished paint, whereas these areas right here are more of a matte finish. Certainly the black up the top there is also more of a matte finish, and he's also got some black underneath the plates of his armor. If we spin the cape around, or spin the figure around, I should say, to show you guys the cape, not only is I think the cape a really nicely sculpted cape, but if you actually look really close to it, you can actually see that they managed to put in some texturing to it. Something, again, I really wasn't expecting them to do. We flip the cape up, you can kind of just see a very basic looking utility belt. I don't even know really how this thing would even be able to hold anything. Just a bunch of gas capsules, I'm guessing. Nothing but gas capsules. There's no battering to be hidden anywhere here. Forget about storing away a bat shield. It ain't happening on a utility belt this small. On the front, it's a differently detailed belt buckle there as well. It's the same gray, of course, or it's a little bit darker of a gray, I should say, than the rest of the armor that he has. But again, like, it's not a bad-looking suit, in all honesty. I mean, the thing about it, though, is because there's so much gray happening, it's so easy just to look at this figure and kind of get lost without actually being able to kind of look in and see all the finer features that they sculpt here. So while he does have really very little paint here, other than just the black that we see, they did manage to at least sculpt some interesting texturing on the inside of his pants. The thing about this also figure is that he does have the little gauntlet blades on the sides of his arm, but I did also want to draw your attention to these shoulder pads. The shoulder pads have me a little concerned just by the very thin nature of the plastic that they end up using. I was going to really leave that until we talked about the articulation on the figure. It doesn't necessarily limit the articulation on the figure, but by moving the arms forward and back like this, I just want to kind of show you there's a very thin amount of plastic that's keeping this attached to the rest of this. And I think by moving the arm forward and back like this, you just want to be careful that you're not warping the plastic, not causing any like fracture lines, for example, in the plastic. And like the plastic's pretty forgiving, but it's very thin plastic that they end up using. I guess they did do that so that it wouldn't limit the articulation on the figure itself. Speaking of the articulation, while we're certainly on the topic of that, the head is on a ball joint once again. It does rotate all the way around. It is only on just the ball joint that attaches to the head. There's no secondary ball joint. While it may even look like there is one right here, there is no secondary ball joint at the base of the neck. You can only just move the head up and down. Even though, despite that, that head actually still manages to move quite a lot. You can have it looking down this far. You can have it looking up that much. You can also hinge it back and forth also as well. As for the shoulders do hinge out, even despite the fact he does have the shoulder pad in place. They move out, and I would say it's about 90 degrees, give or take. He does also have a little socket joint there on the inside. It's actually more there just to conceal the joint. But it does, like little cup joints, also just nicely finish off the rest of the figure's torso without leaving a big barren socket where you're going to see like the arms are plugged into place, for example. Arms move forward, but just again, be careful, like be careful. I don't think I'm making this a lot more worrisome than probably what it actually is. I'm just saying though, if you move the arm too far up and you're doing this a lot of times, it may actually just start to warp the plastic. It just, again, is just a little thin amount that's holding it together. He does have a bicep swivel. Figure does possess also a double hinge on the elbow. Admittingly, I would say, like, when you hinge the elbow this much, it does sort of break things up a little too awkwardly. You can kind of see, like, the way the joint system all kind of comes together. But I mean, in order to accommodate a secondary hinge joint like this, especially if you're going to be putting an elbow pad, it's obviously going to have at some point a look to it like this. There's really no way around that. The figure has an upper torso ball joint, a very generous ball joint too. Figure also has, just below his very simple looking utility belt, a secondary ball joint at the base of the abdomen. Legs do split out. Once again, they seem to be relying on ratcheted joints. You can take those legs, yeah, move them forward. You can move them back. He still manages to have that softer, I know a lot of people coin this as the diaper on the figure. Diaper actually isn't so bad because it's pretty consistently, it follows the same form as the rest of the leg and the abdomen above it. It doesn't actually look like it's a wider piece than everything else that's around it. The legs, again, move forward. You can move them back. A very mild swivel at the top of the thigh. Figure does possess a double hinge on the knee that's a little bit more seamless than the elbow we looked at earlier. And the figure does have also ankle articulation that you can rock back and forth with additionally some toe articulation. Always appreciate that. One thing I noticed about my figure is that he's a little on the looser side on this ankle here. Luckily, he does have, again, the peg holes on the undersides of his feet, so I will be making use of a display stand, not only to keep this guy stable and standing, but also if I did want to put him in any sort of dynamic pose. You know, again, coming from, I'm that guy. I'm the guy that does not like Injustice 2 designs. Never have, never will. And I find some of the figures, honestly, aren't the greatest. I'm not even speaking necessarily of McFarlane Toys, but anytime a company has tackled Injustice 2 designs, I already go out the gate assuming I'm not going to like the figure because I don't like the look of the costumes. I like the more seamless, more classic looking costumes. I'm that old guy. Hello, I'm the old guy that loves the classic stuff and refuses to change. That being said, though, sometimes the Injustice figure designs, character designs, actually do surprise me when they actually get translated to a figure. Like, case in point, Injustice 2 Batman. I like the look of this guy. And now, granted, he is Injustice 2 comic Batman. I think maybe if he was based a little bit more from the game, like we have gotten from other companies before, those do translate to a rather ugly-looking Batman. But I think, honestly, I think this has translated very nicely, thanks to folks over at McFarlane Toys. Though perhaps a little excessive, you can actually manage to get both batarangs in one of Batman's hands, and that's the only thing you can really then do with the other batarang because, again, he doesn't have another gripping hand attached to his form to hold the second. I think, if anything, they probably could have included, at the very least, a secondary gripping hand. To include two batarangs and yet only have one hand to hold them seems a weird choice on their part, but still, I do like the idea that he actually comes included with a batarang that we're not always used to seeing. Normally, the batarangs always look like big, giant mustaches. This one looks less like a mustache and looks a little meaner of a design. Speaking of mean designs, I actually like the look of this Batman design. Normally, again, I know I am, again, the person that doesn't like the Injustice 2 designs, but, again, as I mentioned in this review, this Batman translated to a really nice-looking figure. He's got a lot of gray, though, and he does have a lot of gray and basically only black as being the only two colors that make up the figure's body. He probably could have used maybe just a little bit of actual paint other than just the gray that we get here. But again, overall, nice looking Batman. There is opportunity, I think, for you to, as a customizer, if you are one that likes to touch up your figures, you probably could go in, touch up Batman here. That doesn't sound right. Add a bit of a darker wash and maybe bring out some of the finer features on this figure. But I think out the gate, straight out of the box, he's a nice looking Batman figure. Glad to have this one finally as part of my collection. Once again, though, a big thank you to the folks over at McFarlane Toys that did provide the sample of the brand new Page Puncher's Injustice Batman from the comics, which also did come include with a comic, which I think is going to be the exact same comic. I'm certain it's going to be the exact same comic with the other three figures that we will be looking at in upcoming reviews. That's a plug to let you guys know, come back to this channel. If you guys certainly, though, enjoyed this video, I hit with a like. If you guys love the content you guys are seeing and on board to see the rest of the Page Puncher's Injustice figures, then come back. Make sure you hit that subscribe button down below. Come back and make sure you turn on the bell notification to get those friendly reminders. But overall, just come back. It's always nice to have you guys coming back on a regular basis, checking out the content that the person behind the camera is churning out on a regular basis. As always, guys, thanks for watching. See you guys next time.